Hey, howdy, and welcome all to the Big and Bright podcast. My name is Nick. This here on the phone with me is James.
Howdy.
So I came to the studio this morning, like you're supposed to do when you have a job and when you've committed to something. And James shoots me a text, says, "No, I'm not showing up." James? Where are you?
I'm in an undisclosed area with a sweet Texas flag.
What did you do? It literally looks like
I use my artist
that.
skills.
Literally looks like you did like a child's rub, like one of those rub things. You know what I'm talking about with the crayons.
I'm trying to teach my son arts and crafts. You're gonna make fun of his awesome creation here.
You put Tejas. If your kid did that, that's great. If you did that, that's garbage. I'm just saying.
Then my kid did it.
Very well, right? Your kid did it. We are remote today. We've got a lot of craziness that's been happening out in the world. So
because Nick sneezed at church, and I'm not getting COVID.
Okay. So because James is still afraid of the Rona, despite the fact that we've lifted the lockdown orders here in Texas, we have to go remote today. So we're excited still here to be with you guys. We got a lot to talk about today, specifically being in a border state, being in the great state of Texas. Border states, we have kind of a unique struggle when it comes to how we relate to national politics. And that has been a big deal for the past couple of weeks. So, I'm going to talk to James. James is the guy that knows what's going on the ground. James, what's been happening with the border as it pertains to the past couple of weeks?
Well, as you know, Nick, we do not have a crisis. It's been totally legit across the border. We're just up, 40% than we've ever actually been up about illegal immigrants coming across the border. But that's a side note that we're not going to focus on. But what the amazing Governor Abbott did is he decided to have funds redispersed to make our own border wall.
So we're building our own.
We're building our own freaking wall. Build the wall, baby.
Build the effing wall. So here's the thing. So Texas basically became Thanos at the end of the Avengers movie, right? Where he puts the Infinity Gauntlet on and he goes, "Fine, I'll do it myself."
Yeah.
Right. That's Greg Abbott right now. Greg Abbott's building his own border wall. Now, for those of you guys that believe a border wall is inhumane, and I will never understand this, right? I really won't, right? This idea that a border wall is inhumane. Guys, walls have been a part of national sovereignty for centuries, for eons, right?
Yeah, they tend to work.
Yeah, we even have modern walls, right? I mean, if you've ever been to Israel and you've seen the wall between Israel and Palestine, Benjamin Netanyahu's over here going, "Guys, walls work, I promise."
Oh, I thought you were talking about modern walls, like most of the Democrats who say we don't need walls are in their own walls around their
houses. Yeah, you build walls around your houses. Your houses have walls, right?
That's different, Nick.
It's not different. You want to know why the houses have walls? Because the space inside the house is yours and the space outside the house is public. And you need to separate that. You need to delineate that between, so that people don't enter into your house, right? If somebody knocks at your door and you don't know that person, you can tell them that they don't need to come in.
What if they're just peacefully protesting, trying to get in the house?
The same thing. No.
Oh, okay.
No.
My bad.
I mean, you could do that in, I don't know, you can do that in New Hampshire. Right?
Don't try Missouri.
You can't do that in Texas. You say no peaceful protesting in Texas. You peaceful protest outside of my house. There's more lead in this house than a 1970s paint store. That's what I'm going to tell you. Right. This will not end well for you. So the fact is that national sovereignty means you have to enforce borders. And in order to enforce borders, sometimes, there does have to be a physical barrier. And then there's the other thing is, well, walls don't work, right? Most people come here by overstaying their visas. True. Let's say that that's true, right? Let's say that 70%, which is not the case, right? It's significantly lower than that. But let's just for the sake of steel manning the argument, let's say that 70% of illegal immigrants enter this country by overstaying their visa and come here on planes. Is that 30% not worth building the wall over?
Yeah,
30% of illegal immigrants, right? I mean, it's
because a lot of drugs come over that wall.
A lot of drugs come over the wall. A lot of trafficking happens on that wall. I guarantee trafficking and drugs don't happen on planes in the same way that it does over the border.
No, they have cool shows about it where people get busted all the time.
That's true, right? They made a whole Netflix series about it.
That's pretty cool. What? I didn't know I had drugs in there. What?
I'm telling you, man. And so And again, this is one of those things that I don't like to be one of these people that are like, well, if you don't have my experience, you don't know, right? I mean, this is kind of like the
But
no
it's I
uterus,
mean,
no
it's kind of
opinion.
true though in our fact, it's kind of true.
Well, I mean,
Unless you live on the border, you don't know.
you hear all this stuff about like, well, I mean, like with the abortion argument, no uterus, no opinion, right? You hear, well, you can't deal with my lived experience as a Black person or a Latino person or an Asian person, right? So you can't speak to that. If you don't live in
Write
a
a book.
border, well, that's the thing. Is like I don't necessarily agree with that, but if we're going to follow that logic, then if you don't live in a border state, why do you have the ability to influence policy? Joe Biden is
Or why
from
do you care? I mean, if you don't, I mean, you don't live there. Why do you care?
Joe Biden's from Delaware, isn't he? Right,
Yeah.
Delaware,
Well,
Pennsylvania. He doesn't come from a border state. Why does
he was
he?
there for at least 29 years.
God, whatever. But the fact here is this: we as states, right? So one of the interesting things about federalism, right? One of the interesting things about the fact that the United States exists as a federalist nation, what that means is the national government and the state governments exist independently and they have co-equal authority. And so if the
Kind of.
United,
Yeah.
well, that's how it's supposed to be, right? That's how it's written.
Right. But the federal is always going to have the sovereign. Even a treaty from the president can't override for or actual federal law. If there's a treaty and a federal, like for instance, an executive order and federal law come into dispute, federal law trumps the president, even though he's the one who wrote the federal order.
But the states have the right to decide what they're going to enforce.
Unless it comes to immigration, because then the U.S. has to speak with one voice.
But see, I mean, this is one of those things.
Yeah, it's one of the things we talked about in previous episodes. It's a hard thing.
I understand that you got to speak
but
with one voice as a nation, but I also think that states have the right to say, okay, if the United States is going to allow a porous border, then Texas has the right to say, okay, we can have a porous border, but you guys are going to have to go to California, or you're going to have to go to Arizona,
the thing is, like,
or you're going to have to go to New Mexico.
What is building the wall actually like? How is that actually subverting the federal law? I mean, if it's Texas,
Especially if it's just in Texas.
Yeah, but especially if it's just Texas' own border. If Texas wants to do that, what's the harm? I mean, he got made fun of because people don't like it, and people who like to sit in their ivory towers at the judge things that happens in Texas because it's a red state. But he put a $250 million down payment, and in a span of a week, it was seen as, oh wow, you have nothing really going on. Well, in only a week, over almost $459,000 in private donations came in, like from pretty much like a GoFundMe for the state border wall.
Yeah,
that's just in a week. And their biggest critique is, well, who are those donors? It doesn't matter.
By the way, it's so interesting that governments basically are using GoFundMe now. And I understand that that's kind of what governments.
If it works, it works.
Governments have to petition for money. But the thing is, the government, and by the way, in Texas, the fact that we're resorting to private donations is incredible, because in California, you know what they would do? They would just tax you. They would just say, no, you have to pay this, right? This is now a part of your income tax or something like that. But in Texas, we actually look to the good graces of our citizens. And that's an important thing, especially when it comes to our state sovereignty, it comes to our borders, things like that. I think that the interested party, namely the citizens, should take a stand there, right? They should make a move there.
Did you know that they actually took private property away to make the lands federal so they can build the wall?
I did not know that.
Yeah, Trump had that happen.
They used eminent domain?
Well, it was basically volunteer, but yeah, eminent domain. So they still gave him money for that collateral. But Abbott is now expects Texans that volunteered their land for the project. And Abbott is going to send a letter to President Biden saying, hey, those Trump things that you don't want in there, you don't want these Trump laws, that undo this Trump action of taking it from federal and move it back to private property, and let them decide if they want to have a gate or fence or whatever built on their own land.
So Abbott is basically,
I can't imagine Biden's going to give that up, though.
So Abbott is basically just relying on private citizens to build walls on their own property?
Or to allow them to, because the government will have the funds. It's going to be, can I build on your property?
See,
It's still their property, so you still have to compensate them one way or another.
Well, the thing is that if you're the one guy, so right, if you're in the Rio Grande Valley or something like that, and you're the one dude that decided no, right?
You're flying that Obama flag high, going, I'm not gonna do it.
Now you're gonna have all these coyotes crossing the border there. So luck to you, I guess. But I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that because, I mean, and again, in Texas, we're an independent state, right? We thrive on individual independence. But at the
Well, the biggest
same,
critique is that the cost of it is like, well, because they have these factors, like a study they had on what was going to cost for walls depending on terrain and everything else, and they took the biggest one, shockingly, because they don't like it, and they made that the overall factor. Like they said, it cost 26.5 million per mile to construct. Yet 1 mile of that would probably cost that. The rest of them don't cost anywhere near that.
yeah.
The Biden administration has said the wall cost taxpayers 46 million per mile. So somehow it raised prices. I think it was because of Biden's inflation, but who knows?
With building equipment right now.
He's building it back better.
No, he's not. But that's a different discussion altogether. The point here is, I mean, I understand that you need to litigate costs. I get that. But at the same time, if we're going with the one voice parameter, right? This idea that a nation or a state needs to speak with one voice when it comes to its own borders and sovereignty. I mean, again, as a Texan, man, it kind of cringes, it kind of freezes the blood to say this, but I think the government should step in there. I think the government should say, no, this is a part of it, and we will compensate you for the portion of your land that we take, but we need to make sure that we can secure the border.
I think that's the overall plan, but a fair critique of Abbott right now is he has not detailed any plan of how long it will take, how much the overall cost will be. He just kind of started the whole process. Granted, sometimes you got to get the ball rolling before you can actually see the plan. But if you're in politics, people are going to typically want a plan, and I don't blame them. That's a good critique, in my opinion.
This is an interesting situation then, because of the fact that Abbott doesn't. I mean, he's announced that this is happening, but he hasn't provided details for it.
Or where he's going to start.
One could assume that this might be something like posturing. If that's the case, do you think that there's a possibility that this might be posturing because he's looking for the presidency in 2024?
That or trying to get reelected in 2022.
I mean,
everybody forgets he is reelection in 2022 for governor. And it seems like he's a lockstep. He's not exactly a lockstep.
I can see that he'd want to do that, but at the same time, I mean, with Biden in the White House right now, I think every Republican's got to at least be considering the possibility of, hey, maybe there's a chance. Maybe there's a chance that I show up big in the Republican
Well, that's the
primary.
beauty, I think, of this whole thing. As much as it's easier to downplay Biden, only because he doesn't know what he's saying when he says things. But I think because the state has taken over Biden and made him just do whatever their bidding wants to be, he is not dead sure what's going on, so he's just going with it. And that's forcing states to go, all right, he's not going to stand up to him. All right, let's just dust off this 10th Amendment thing and just try this out and see how far we can go. So which, by the way, states to go state rights, which in my opinion is probably the better thing, because screw the national thing. Just focus on your state and let everybody else hopefully figure themselves out.
And if there was any silver lining to the Biden presidency, if there was anything that I would ever say, hey, I'm really happy that the Biden's presidency exists because of X, it would be the 10th Amendment, right? The reinstatement of the 10th Amendment, the fact that states are allowed to kind of do whatever they need to do and enforce the laws that they want to enforce. I'm actually really happy about that, especially because I live in a state that values things like its sovereignty, but it also values things like the benefit of its citizens, right? It values things like the independence and the freedom of its citizens. I don't know if I'd feel the same way if I lived in a state like Massachusetts or California or New York or something like that.
You wouldn't be allowed to have opinions if you lived out there.
I mean, for sure. But the fact that I live in Texas, that's the one good thing about the Biden presidency moving forward. So speaking of the Biden presidency, what was Biden's plan from the border? What was Biden's plan for the border from the get-go?
I'm going to pass this off to someone else so I can't get the blame. Smart man.
Oh, you're saying that's what Biden did. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were saying you were passing this off to someone. I thought you were going to do one of those things that one of those H3 things where you switch it off with somebody else. No, that's not what's going to happen. Okay, so Biden's going to pass it off to somebody else. Now, I recall, this is the crazy thing, right? I recall when COVID happened, right? And so for those of you that don't remember, COVID started under the Trump administration. And who was it who was it that Biden put, or rather, sorry, who was it that Trump put it in charge of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Mr. Mike Pence.
Was that Mr. Mike Pence? And do you remember how the left reacted to Mr. Mike Pence being placed in charge of the COVID-19 crisis?
They loved him.
No, that's not true at all. Right? They were.
Oh, I have heavily edited TV, so maybe I watched some of the good parts.
It was crazy. I remember seeing one time Mike Pence was praying, right? And they said, "This is Mike Pence praying for COVID-19."
Can't do that, dirty
We
Christian.
are so screwed. That's what they said. We are so screwed, right? Well, now, right? So they were so critical of President Trump for putting his vice president in charge of one of the biggest crisis, if not the biggest crisis of his presidency. And now Joe Biden has put his vice president, Kamala Harris, in charge of the biggest crisis of his presidency.
Well,
And
I
for those,
don't know if it's the same though. I don't know if it's the same.
no, it's not the same. It's not the same.
Yeah, because Trump actually knowingly did it, and Biden said, oh, "Okay."
I guess
He didn't know he made that decision.
Kamala, you got something we can do.
Someone just shows him his notes and said, "Oh, I did check that box. Okay, I checked that box. Thank you."
Today I'm gonna eat the tickle me pink crayon. Here's the thing. Biden put his vice president in charge of the biggest crisis of his presidency. And for those of you that say, well, Nick,
Not a crisis.
COVID is the biggest crisis of his presidency. No, it's not. The border is the biggest crisis of his presidency. And I will say this. So, I mean, we've been looking at a lot of articles regarding the fact that Kamala Harris is finally going to
After
the border.
90 days, she has finally graced Texas with her presence.
And a lot of these refer to Trump's policy of separating families.
It's
Trump's policy of separating them. Are you kidding me? What planet are you from?
Well,
First
I just
of all,
like that when Kamala Harris also went down there, she said for the first get-go, "This is not political. It's all about the children." That's why you have.
If it was all about the
right?
children, you'd have been there. I don't know. Hold on. I want to say carry the
90 days ago.
Yeah, 90 days ago. That's when you would have been there. It was for the children. This is a political maneuver, and everybody knows that. And the reason why
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
She said that it was planned, and it was like, well, it didn't seem planned. We did that interview. Said you also didn't go to Europe.
It was planned.
Okay.
Two reasons. One, Abbott just said he's building his own wall. That's reason one. Two, who's also coming out of the border?
Oh, I think there's a big person coming down there.
I think that'd be old DJT.
He's gonna wear a red hat. Yeah.
DJT 45 is gonna come down to the border, and so Kamala Harris got to meet him to scold them, right? This is
because if she doesn't go before he goes, it's gonna look horrible politically. So it's like, see, I went.
This is 100% political posturing, and because of the fact, because we know this, and so many people are saying no, it's political. So many people are trying so hard to lie to themselves that this is political posturing, because the fact is that if this is just political posturing, which it is, that means that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden do not care about the issues that are happening at the border.
I actually had a little fact.
Care.
Yeah, I had a little factoid here to be ticky-tacky, and sounds like we're already hitting that realm, so I might as well go over that.
Ticky-tack is fine. Whole podcast built on ticky-tack.
Yeah, well, she went to El Paso. Okay, she didn't go to the border that actually has the fortified area, or the not fortified area that's actually pouring on all these people. So it's about 1,000 miles away from that.
Theory about that. Move on.
Okay, the place she went to is actually 9 miles away from the border. Just to let you know. She also didn't stay very long. She stayed for maybe like 4 hours and then flew back to California, which she's been 3 prior times. This is now the 4th time she's been since being VP. But it's super important about the border. And she didn't meet with Democrat Rep Henry Cellular, who has been asking for help this entire time, because there's the one Democrat saying, it's not actually solved down here. Can you please come help? She did not meet with the governor when she came here. She met with some legal activists and the El Paso representative, who was fawning over her the entire time, and people who represent illegal immigrants and bed services. So she went to the border, but did she?
Yeah.
I mean, Ted Cruz, John Cornyn, and Abbott has all criticized her and said she didn't go to the part that actually has the worst and all this. I'm like, well, still politically, she did go.
You want to know why she went to El Paso? Because she's safe in El Paso.
Well, yeah, because there's walls there.
She's safe.
There's no
not
walls
even
down
just, not
South
even just
Texas.
wall. I'm not just talking about the safety of her physical person. I'm talking about her political safety. She's safe there. You want to know why? Because you know who dominates El Paso?
Democrats.
Beto. Old Beto O'Rourke, man. I mean, that's the part of tech. Aside from Austin, El Paso is actually one of the more Democrat parts of Texas. So of course you're going to go there. I mean, you're not going to go to like you're not going to go to the actual West Texas. You're going to go to Lajitas. You're not going to go to Terlingua, right? You're not going to go to Balmorhea or any of those places. You're going to go to.
Those aren't even towns. You're just making names up now, man.
No, those are actual towns in West Texas. You should absolutely go. It's actually, by the way, and this is a total sidebar. Total sidebar has nothing to do with what we're talking about. For those of you listeners out there, if you want to go have a good, cheap vacation, West Texas. West Texas is one of the best places to go. Avoid Marfa, because Marfa's done. Marfa's been Californiaized and it's no good anymore. But go see some of those places like Fort Davis, Balmorhea, Terlingua, Lajitas, all those places. Go check those out. Cheap, also an amazing experience. So,
or you can be really cultured and see Europe in Texas.
Why? By going to Paris?
No, there's multiple cities that have Europe names. Italy, Texas, Paris, Texas. There's a lot of different
Isn't
ones.
There a London, Texas? I think there's a London, Texas also. Yeah, don't
do
do
Hershey, Texas. I mean, there's it's like a 1,300-mile actual trek in Texas. Pretty cool, actually. You can tour Europe without actually having to leave the great nation of Texas.
That's true. Don't do that. I've been to Paris, Texas. Ain't nothing worth seeing in Paris, Texas.
They have an oil derrick that is an Eiffel Tower.
They have an oil derrick that's an Eiffel Tower. It's got a little Texas hat on top of it. That's the only thing worth seeing in Paris. That being said, West Texas is a great place to go. But that's not where Kamala Harris went. Kamala Harris went to the place where she was going to be politically safe because she wanted to showboat. She wanted to show, because here's the thing, Kamala Harris does not actually care. She does not actually care about the effects that immigration is having on her citizens, right? On the citizens, especially of the border states. She does not actually care about the effects of immigration on immigrants, right? She does not actually care about the whole kids in cages narrative, because she would have gone down and at least done a white coat, fake crying episode like AOC did. She does not actually care. She is a figurehead. She's being put in place by the administration to demonstrate some sort of empathy, but she's not there for any significant reason.
Well, it's still Trump derangement syndrome, because he said he was going to do it. You haven't done it. Therefore, I got to do it to oppose him.
Here's the thing.
It's how I mean, I don't blame him. If it's so easy for me to say a simple thing and you get all bent out of shape, of course, I'm going to say these simple things just piss you off because it's funny to me. If I can change the whole news cycle by saying a simple statement, that's awesome. I mean, imagine that kind of power. It's just awesome.
Yeah. But I will say this, and I know I've said this before, but this whole concept of, to Democrat politicians, don't sully my state with your presence. That's not genuinely how I feel, but I do feel that way about Kamala Harris, because I don't feel like she's here because she cares about the state of Texas. I don't feel like she's here because she cares about the citizens of Texas. I feel like she's here because she's trying to score political points, and because Trump derangement syndrome, in an era where Trump has not been president for months, right? We're going on almost a year now, right? Trump has not been president. Well, it's about half a year.
Okay, let's say January is not a year away.
So we're going on about a year, half a year, right? So by the time we get to like September, that'll be about a year. So we're going on about a year. That's what I said.
All right.
I think it works. The point is that Trump has not been president for quite some time, right? Trump, and the fact is that
he has, though, right here.
But for the Democrats, listen, you guys are going to have to eventually start standing on your own merits, or I hate to break this to you, you're going to lose. You're going to lose. If you do not start trying to make a case for your own points, as opposed to simply pointing back to the last president, you are going to lose. It's just the reality.
Well, CNN and MSNBC, they're seeing their viewership. It just keeps tanking down and down and down and down. It's like, right, you got nothing to rally cry over anymore.
Well, let's take it back to what we were talking about before, right? Even Donald Trump had most of his votes come from the fact that he wasn't Hillary Clinton. And we see that can't last, right? This idea of you're constantly looking back to the last president, you're not going to fare very well in the future elections.
Yeah.
Democrats, you are in for a world of hurt if you cannot find a way to convince the people, particularly the people of red states like Texas, that you mean well and that you actually intend for good things to happen in their states. If you can't convince them of that, you're cruising for a bruising, guys. And I say this with all sincerity because I want the
keep
benefit for
flip flopping,
the
man.
whole country. What do you mean?
They'll keep flip flopping. I mean, voter ID was racist. Now all of a sudden, I was like, I never said voter ID was racist, dude. We have you on video.
Oh my God, that is
like, you kidding me? But people
Talk
in short
about
memories, and
flipping
they'll
the
believe
narrative.
whatever they told them.
No, yeah, you're talking about flipping the narrative. I mean, this is the epitome of gaslighting, right? You're saying all of these things, and then as soon as it becomes not politically popular, you're saying, "Oh no, I never said that." Right? I never said that. The fact is, I think Democrats, you guys are going to start really feeling the pain, and you're going to wish that you had paid attention to states like Texas.
Well, I think also for going back to the wall, though, I think that Texas could actually build it and do it in a much more effective way than we have been building it. Because I sent you a couple articles. This is a magazine, Laser Focus World, and another article from Business Insider, and they suggest a fiber optic fence, which I thought was kind of like, that's kind of weird, but let's keep reading.
Yeah.
And basically, it creates a line all the way underneath the magic line we have for our border, and it can detect from up to 10 meters of somebody walking up to it to a meter and having a pinpoint of someone being exactly where it says they are. And it can differentiate very easily between that's an animal, that's a person. And I just found this also. They did an experiment in the Sonoran Desert, I believe that's in Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a low flying plane about 8 kilometers above it, and it picked it up. So if you're trying to fly low to avoid the radar, it can still pick you up and have it pinpoint on something just happened right there. Send Border Patrol, find out what happened.
I think that could work. The problem is that the border of Texas is gigantic.
It is,
and
but you can do it in small sections. Like, you can do it about like a mile section each, because the fiber optic can actually extend that far, and you can have it reroute so many times.
Here's the thing: I've been to the border. The border is dramatically understaffed for something like that.
Mm-hmm.
There are not nearly enough actual posts where you have Border Patrol being able to respond to a call. It's just.
But here's where technology can save it, because for fiber optic, it is. They did it for it. It's hard to get money types for fiber optic, the pricing, because it has never been used for this type of technology before. So it's still new, but it is now being tested in certain parts of Arizona's border. But it's about $10 per meter. The current way we build it is about $10,800 per meter. So that's over 1,000 times. So if you can shorten to that, imagine how much money you could save building that, and then you can fulfill that with border agents and different kind of posts, because you save the money one way, you're already going to spend it, and we all know you're going to spend it. So you might as well spend it on actually having Border Patrol down there and having multiple posts. Because if they could save a border agent from having to go check a location from a sensor of the current way we build it, well, that could be a freaking animal. Now they waste an hour and a half, go check it on the animal.
Are you talking about? So when you talk about fiber optics, are you talking about a fiber optic border that's purely virtual? Like, there's no physical barrier?
There would not be a physical barrier. It would be underneath the ground, a cable underneath the ground.
Oh, okay. So this would be there would actually be no construction at all. This would just be a fiber optic cable.
Right. And it would save a crap ton of money, and it could use the technology to not have to build an ugly wall, and it'd be green, because you wouldn't disrupt any kind of natural animal crossings, but you'd be able to tell what just hopped on our border. Oh, that's a coyote. Okay, this is an actual coyote that's trying to bring people over. Let's go see that coyote, though, because that one's different. Because when they did the experiment in the desert, they were able to tell a dog, a pack of people, and one man just walking up to it, running to it, trying to crawl, dig underneath, everything. Like, if you get anywhere near that border within 10 meters to sometimes even 20 meters on the ground, even digging it, trying to dig underneath it, it's going to pick it up. And so you're allowing people to have a pinpoint, boom, let's go right there, something nefarious happening, and we pick them up, and then we take them on back.
So this is what I'm saying. If we have options like this that are that cost effective, right? This almost proves my point, right? It's this cost effective, and they're still not doing anything about it. Why not? Right? If you can't make the economic case anymore, you can't even make the whole like aesthetic, right?
Or green energy bull crap.
Walls are ugly. Yeah, green energy is another one, but this whole like concept of walls are ugly, walls are immoral, walls are a bad thing. You don't even have a physical wall.
Yeah.
Right. You have a purely digital thing.
But I was talking to my sister about this because she's the one who actually put this on my head, and I was like, I've never heard that. So I looked it up and I found it. And there's even and she used to speaking over a person that spoke many years ago that if you can get this fiber optic cable in there, that can actually allow some broadband internet to people in the areas that it can't be reached because satellites just aren't there and there's no towers. Well, if you create the own tower, there you go. The only problem with that is
really interesting.
Possible hacking.
If the best internet in the country is in South Texas, right?
Yeah. But the thing is that we still have to take the real world effect. Like this isn't like, oh, this is awesome. Why don't we start doing this? Well, hacking still exists too. So you're gonna have a heavy cybersecurity over this. And we've already seen how easily that's corrupted from a pipeline.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
So I mean it's not perfect, and this is still new. And the article that you'll see in the description even says like the reason it's kind of like still new and governments aren't jumping onto it, because think about it, a few years ago, if someone told you you're gonna have fiber in your house, you'd look at them and go, what are you talking about? No, I'm not. I have internet. I don't need fiber. Well, turns out fiber is a lot easier to connect everybody there, and you have amazing internet. So everybody pretty much has fiber who can afford it now.
For sure.
So it's a pretty amazing technology. It just never has been used for this kind of technology. But why aren't we trying it? Because they're already testing it. They've done experiments. It worked. Let's do it from Texas.
So my theory here is that we're not trying it because I don't think the federal government actually has an interest in keeping people out of the border, right? I think that when they talk about the wall, the aesthetic of the wall, that's an easier case to make because it's so visible, it's so there. But I think ultimately what they want to say is that it is immoral to keep anybody out of the country, especially especially even if it's a situation where this isn't their country, right? And people say, well, this country belongs to one person or another. You have to have some sort of sovereignty, right? This country has to belong to somebody, right? It has to belong to some group of people. And why can't those people be Americans? Why can't those people be Texans? What's wrong with that, right? We have to hold on to that. And one of the joys of being from Texas is that we are in so many ways a bulwark. We're a bulwark against the predations of the left politically, I think, still, holding on to that one, right?
We'll see.
You know what? We voted for Donald Trump pretty safely in the last election, right? I think we're still pretty secure in the red side, right? But not only that, we are a bulwark, a physical bulwark against the predations of other countries that want to come in here and take our way of life, right? And I know that when you say things like way of life, that sounds so, that sounds so hick now, and it really shouldn't, because the fact is that in the United States, we have a set of principles. We have founding documents that guide those principles. We have things like political freedom, individuality. We have things which don't exist in other parts of the country. And we need to be able to say that if you come in here, you need to adhere to those values, or I'm sorry, but we're going to need to tell you to go. And I know that sounds harsh, but that is the way it is. That's the way.
It's called standards. We have standards.
And
you
there
don't
has
date
to
just
be
anybody. You date people you want to have standards with.
True.
That's how regular people work. So why can't it work in that simple way of immigration?
And there has to be somebody that stands against that. And why can't that somebody be Texas? Right? Why shouldn't that somebody be Texas? Because somebody has to stand against the oncoming night. And while the night is very dark, as I always say, the stars at night are big and bright.
We'll
see you next week.